Welcome. The next work we're going to be looking at are going to be a set of plays from Aristophanes. Specifically, we're going to look at 6 different plays from Aristophanes, and those are going to be the birds, the clouds, the frogs, Lysistrata, the knights, the wasps, and the assembly women. So these are the ones from the Western canon. Um, Now, the introduction, this is our introduction, and this can serve as an introduction for all 6 of those books. It's just us generally trying to get some background information. Who is Aristophanes? Where did he live? When did he live? What was life like? What is the context around these plays? What are some things we might want to know that will allow us to get as much as possible out of reading these plays, right? It seems reasonable. And so that's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to do here. I have some questions that I've asked to ChatGPT. We're going to read through the answers, and we'll probably look through some maps and things like that and see what we can understand. So I said, who was Aristophanes, the ancient Greek playwright? And we see Aristophanes, he lived from 446 to 386 BC, was the greatest comic playwright of ancient Athens, and is often called the father of comedy. He wrote during the classical period of ancient Greece and was a master of old comedy, a style known for its bold satire, political commentary, fantastical plots, and bawdy humor. So one thing we want to keep in mind while we're reading this is ancient Greek comedy, specifically old comedy. So like we're categorizing this in our mind. So as we're reading this, and then we can kind of get a firsthand understanding of what comedy is in that context, right? You'll hear people like reference tragedy, comedy, satire often. And then by reading these, this is kind of our best living work of what ancient Greek comedy looked like. So some key facts about Aristophanes: born in Athens, lived during the height and decline of the Athenian Empire, including the Peloponnesian War, famously, between Athens and Sparta. And this heavily influences plays. So at least 2 of them that survive directly have to do with the Peloponnesian War and its aftermath. He wrote around 40 plays, 11 survive today. And he's the only old comedy author that we still have any works of. Themes: political satire, social commentary, fantasy, and absurdity. So the social commentary and political satire, he was just a cutting, just would make fun of and mock people of the day, sometimes to getting himself into trouble, which we'll see in a second. And the style, using the chorus and the parabasis, and vulgar humor. So the chorus is central to all of the types of Greek theater, and it's used a little differently in comedy than it is in tragedy. So we'll see more about that as well. Yeah, he's the only surviving examples of Greek comedy. I just said that. So I said, can you explain what comedy is in the context of ancient Greece? What kind of comedy did Aristophanes produce, and how does this contrast with ancient Greek drama and other forms of theater at the time? So in the context of ancient Greece, comedy was a formal dramatic genre performed at festivals, just like tragedy, with its own rules, styles, and civic function. It wasn't just entertainment, but often political and satirical, right? And important to the civic life and religious life of Athens. So Greek comedy evolved alongside tragedy and satire as a part of the Dionysian festivals, particularly the city of Dionysia and Lenaea. So we're going to read about that in a second. These are 2 major festivals that were like central to the civic life of Athens. So the comedy used masks, chorus, music, and dance, but it was more to amuse, provoke, and mock. So we can imagine like a very exciting, sort of lighthearted, like bawdy affair. There are 3 phases: old comedy, which Aristophanes is he is the example of old comedy; middle comedy, which came later; and then new comedy, as the name implies, came the most recent. And people, they would say a lot of modern comedy kind of really evolved from the new comedy sort of branch. Features of Aristophanic comedy So again, political satire, mocking figures like Cleon, Socrates, Euripides, and we'll see more about that in a second. Fantastical plot. So we're going to start with the birds, and you'll see the birds is set in literally just this made-up sky utopia that he creates. So we're very excited to read that. Comic techniques. So this parabasis. So we're going to break down the different stages of the comedy so that you kind of know what you're reading when you're going through it. This parabasis, this is when the chorus speaks directly to the audience on behalf of the playwright. So when we are in the parabasis stage, this is basically Aristophanes speaking directly to us, or more realistically to his Athenian contemporaries who were watching the play at the festival. You have an agon, which is a formal debate between characters representing opposing ideas. So if the play is debating war and peace, in the agon, there will be a debate between the war and the peace side. Body humor, right? Sexual, very sexual, and very like phallic and things like that. And we can laugh at that. That's fine. And then choral interludes, costumes and dance. And this was like, this was a function. Like this is like, imagine going to the Super Bowl or something like that, right? So it wasn't just art for the ages, which it was. It was something that was looked forward to by people of all levels of intellect. But I will say, I was thinking about this, like, and it mentions this. If you read the introduction of the book that we're using, the Bantam Classic book, they note that a lot of the references and things that Aristophanes is talking about, they're very advanced. They're highly political. He's making references to all this or not theology, but these ancient stories and different political and military things that are going on, and these festivals could have tens of thousands of people, or 10 to 15,000 people, something like that. And he was the expectation was this was entertaining, so everyone would understand what he was talking about, and it just speaks to the level of education of the average Athenian at that time, that this highly advanced sort of writing could be accessible and actually entertaining to quote unquote the masses, although this would be a subset of the upper echelon, but still. So yeah, we're going to contrast with the other forms coming up. So I said, describe these festivals, how they were structured, what was their purpose, who would have been there, and what would have been like to attend one. So we want to be able to kind of put ourselves in the mindset. I think we'll get more out of it if we're thinking or if we're understanding what it would have been like to see it as it was written for, right? Aristophanes, he's not writing this for some guy in his office in 2025. He's writing it for his Athenian contemporaries at this super banger party, festival, religious ceremony, right? So the ancient Athenian festivals, especially the city Dionysia and Linnea, were large sacred public events held in honor of the god Dionysus, the deity of wine, fertility, and theater. And these festivals were among the most significant cultural occasions in Athens and served religious, political, and artistic purposes. So the city Dionysia was the bigger one, and that was held in the spring, in late March, early April, and it was at the Theater of Dionysus, which is at the foot of the Acropolis. So we have some images here. I'm sure I hope everyone's familiar with Europe and the Mediterranean Sea. So we see Italy and Turkey, right? And Greece is kind of in between here. And then if we zoom in, we have Athens, right? And so, Greece is very hilly and rocky. And so we see that Athens is right at the end of this peninsula here. And Athens itself is right here. It's not actually on the coast. They have Piraeus, which is their port city. We'll see that more in a second. And then so Athens kind of exists in this nice, flat, lowland region that's kind of cut out of the mountains or the hills here at the end of this peninsula. And of course, we're going to see this soon, but Sparta is down here, and there's a whole lot of stuff going on. When we talk about the Peloponnesian War, we'll discuss that. And that's Athens. And then if we look at Athens itself, if we look at the city of Athens, Like, so that's Athens. If we zoomed in, we would in ancient Athens, you would see something like this. So at the center of the city, you have this black line would be like the wall, and then here's the Acropolis. This is a very important religious site that's kind of central to Athenian life. And then this theater of Dionysus would be down south, just south of it, right here. And we can actually get an image of what the theater of Dionysus would have looked like. This is an artist's impression, but you get the picture that this was really a grand affair. Marble columns, large stone sort of bleachers or whatever. It's an amphitheater, and then you'd have these incredible performances here with a stage and all this stuff. We actually have an image of what survives of it today. This is, again, in Athens, obviously. This is the surviving foundations of the theater of Dionysus. And you could get a picture of what it would have been like. Maybe they had some wood benches. We're not really sure. But probably maybe stone, not great for the butt. Bring your own cushion sort of situation. So this was a major festival. I'll leave it on the nice one. Featuring tragedy, comedy, satire, and all sorts of different religious processions. And it had up to 17,000 citizens, including Athenian men, women, slaves, and potentially foreign dignitaries and other things, medics, resident foreigners, etc. Linnea was in midwinter. So anyway, I would also say that the Dionysian festival being in spring, obviously Dionysus being this sort of like plentiful god of the harvest and fertility, spring would be the time for that. So just a little context. And then Linnea, midwinter, it's a smaller one, but it's more locally focused. So this would be just Athenian citizens. And then comedy was the main attraction for this one. So we can imagine it's colder. It's just the Athenians. We're praying to Dionysus. Not us, but they would have been to, bring the spring and bring the harvest, right? And then comedy, we're laughing to kind of get through these hard times, maybe. Some focus, so religious rituals would have been central. Sacred acts dedicated to Dionysus. We want to bring the harvest. We want to bring new children and fertility. Ritual dancing, sacrifices, procession. A big statue of Dionysus is paraded into the city. And then you have the chorus and music and singing. And then the theatrical competition. So the theater was like the fun part, probably, sort of. I wouldn't say it's secular, but you could say like that's like, sort of the fun, interesting sort of part that everyone would have been watching. You would have 3 days of tragedy. So we will be covering tragedy later in the series. But tragedy was central and had a more central role. You would have 3 days of tragedy, and then a satire play at the end of each day. And then you would have 1 day of comedy. And it was more prominent at Linnea, like we just said. And there would be prizes funded by wealthy citizens. So, our friend Aristophanes, he's not just, I'm sure he was proud of his plays. He wanted to win for honor, and there was money involved. So, keep that in mind as well. This isn't just some hermit writing, because it's very different, right? Sometimes we think about the writer, we think about like some hermit who's sitting in a cave and he's just writing his amazing thoughts, and he doesn't care if anyone hears it or doesn't, whatever. This is totally different. This is like a metropolitan, urban, Mediterranean citizen who's writing for his own pleasure, I'm sure, but also more for the entertainment of his brothers and for glory. It's a totally different mindset, and a mindset that's probably good for us, to have, but maybe more on that in the conclusion. And political elements functioned as a public gathering for democracy. Obviously, there would be tributes to Athenian allies, from Athenian allies. More on that in a second. Orphans of fallen warriors were paraded, and then the opening ceremony showcased Athens' imperial strength and civic identity. Yeah, you could imagine if you had a civilization like this, you'd be proud too. It's quite extraordinary. And who attended? Athenian male citizens. We already went through this. Who's going to be there? What was it like to attend? So we kind of went through that, what it looks like. You could imagine the grandeur and sort of like the pomp and circumstance. Very communal, rowdy, especially during the comedies, right? So, it sounds like a lot of fun, honestly. You could imagine that, for instance, there's some tyrant who's, maybe you like him, maybe you don't, and then Aristophanes comes out and he makes fun of him in his play. I mean, I'm sure it was uproarious, the laughter. So patriotic and pious, deeply meaningful, etc., etc. Right? We don't need to read the rest. And then I just want to highlight the difference between the types of plays, right? Because I think we're doing this series to educate ourselves, right? Among other, I mean, for many reasons, but one of the reasons is to educate ourselves and to be educated. If we're learning about Greek plays, ancient Greek plays, we might want to learn the different, we might want to internalize and really like solidify and kind of remember forever what are the different types of Greek plays, Greek theater, and what separates them, right? So we're doing comedy now, and there are three types. So I said, describe the difference between tragedy, satire, and comedy in the ancient Greek context. And it says, in the ancient Greek context, tragedy, satire, and comedy were distinct dramatic forms, each with different purposes, structures, tones, themes, and origins. Yeah, okay. Together they form the backbone of Greek theatrical and religious culture. So that's kind of obvious. So tragedy. The purpose of tragedy, and tragedy is the more famous, like Pericles and Oedipus, and not Oedipus, well, yeah, Oedipus too, actually. Whatever. That's the more, when you think of Greek plays, you think of a lot of the tragedies, right? These are very dramatic. So their purpose is to explore profound moral, psychological, and philosophical questions about fate, justice, suffering, and the gods. They have a serious tone, elevated language, very sort of like chaste and highly well-behaved and sort of high culture. They're derived from myth and heroic legend. They center around a noble character who has a tragic flaw. Hercules or something like that. It evokes catharsis, a purging of pity and fear in the audience. And then it ends with death, destruction, or profound loss. So not so great, right? And it has its own structure. So prologue, parados, which is the entrance of the chorus, episodes, which are scenes, stasima, the choral odes, and then an exodus, which is an exit scene. And the chorus plays a moral and reflective role. And then we're going to be actually reading, I don't know if we're reading Aeschylus. We are reading Sophocles and Euripides. But yeah, so tragedy, very serious, moral, philosophical, sort of reflective and moral. Comedy, the purpose is, and that's what we're reading with Aristophanes, the purpose is to mock, entertain, provoke, by exposing social absurdities, criticizing politics, and flipping the world upside down through humor, fantasy, and satire, which is fun, right? So the characteristics, lighthearted body tone, but underlying serious commentary. So we're going to see Aristophanes, he's mocking the tyrants of the day. He's mocking Socrates even, and other people like that, his contemporary playwrights and things. So it deals with real problems, but it does it through a joking manner. And I'm excited to kind of see the contrast between these two different styles. Often set in contemporary Athens. I mean, we say that because, we only have Aristophanes, so it's kind of pointless. Uses exaggeration, caricature, sexual jokes. It breaks the fourth wall through the parabasis, and this is when the chorus directly addresses the audience. And remember, it's coming from the perspective of Aristophanes himself. So let's go through the structure of Old Comedy. We want to remember this. This is going to help us during our reading. So you have the prologue, the parados, the agon, which is the formal debate, the parabasis. That's when the chorus speaks to the audience during or as from Aristophanes' perspective, and the episodes, and then the komos, which is the final revelry. And it says the chorus could be birds, frogs, wasps, or any imaginative group, although often the chorus would represent the city of Athens itself. It depends, and we're going to have to see based on the context. Finally, satire. Satire provides comic relief after a trilogy of tragedies by parodying the myth in a ridiculous or obscene way. So it's short and myth-based, but presented in a raunchy manner, and it features a chorus of satyrs, which are half man, half goats, and followers of Dionysus. They are drunk, lewd, etc. It has a tragic structure, but with a comic tone, and so it kind of serves to like cut the edge or lessen the edge of the tragedies a little bit, right? Euripides' Cyclops, which we'll be reading, is an example of a satire play. So I said, because we are going to be, at least one or two of these stories has to do with the Peloponnesian War and has to do with sort of Athenian politics, either pre or post the war. So I said, describe the Athenian Empire at the time of Aristophanes' life and during the setting of his writing. How was society structured, and what was the political and military situation? So at the time of Aristophanes' life and career, from 446 to 386 BC, Athens was at the peak of its imperial power. You could imagine that, a civilization that could make this, although this is an artistic impression, was quite great. But this was followed by a period of intense decline and crisis due to the Peloponnesian War and internal political upheaval. And his comedies reflect and respond to this dramatic arc in Athenian history, celebrating its ideals, mocking its flaws, and mourning its collapse. So we talk about the Athenian Empire, or the Delian League. So after the Persian Wars, which were in the early 5th century BC, Athens led a coalition of city-states known as the Delian League, which were formed in 478 BC, originally to defend against further Persian attacks. The member states paid tributes, either in ships or money, which Athens eventually used to enrich itself, to rebuild the Acropolis, and to build its massive navy, which was sort of the source of its power. And over time, this alliance evolved into an Athenian empire, where Athens exerted control over its allies, suppressed revolts, and moved league treasuries to Athens. So we have, actually, I'll go back here, because first we'll see that this would be the Athenian Empire, essentially, right? We have Athens here in the, whatever this is, orange, whatever, red. That would be their direct territory that they were controlling. And then they have all these sea routes, and you see all this yellow territory. So all of this part of the, sort of all the way up to the Black Sea here, up to Byzantium, and then the whole west coast of what is now Turkey, and then even parts of the west coast of Greece were all part of this Delian League that Athens was exerting hegemony over. And you could imagine the wealth that this brought was extreme. And then this would be a picture, we'll get to this more in a second, but you can see this shows sort of the same thing, but it shows some of the other powers in the region. So Athenian society was hierarchical and exclusive, usually, but unusually participatory for its time, right? We know Athens is the famous cradle of democracy, right? Only adult males with Athenian parentage could vote, hold office, or own land. Women could not vote. Resident foreigners could work and pay taxes, but didn't have political rights. Slaves were a third of the population, and then we had the allied subjects who sent tribute, right, which gave Athens a lot of its wealth, as well as trade, of course. They had a radical direct democracy where offices were filled by random selection or by lot, and then people would vote. Citizens would vote, basically. Powerful citizens could rise to prominence as orators, generals, or strategoi, but the people were sovereign. And of course, the Boule was a council of 500, set the agenda and courts and enforced the laws. So really idealistic, and set for a highly educated, sort of mercantile, metropolitan society. It must have been quite amazing. The cultural peak. So this era produced Socrates, Pericles, Herodotus, Thucydides, Sophocles, Euripides, and Aristophanes, and others. Plato, right? Aristotle. This was the fertile ground of basically that allowed Western civilization to bloom and be created. It's amazing. And Athens became a center of art, architecture, philosophy, and drama. So now let's talk about the war itself, right? The Peloponnesian War was a devastating, and it occurred between 431 and 404 BC. So all during Aristophanes' life, It was a devastating conflict between Athens and the Peloponnesian League, which was led by Sparta. The major causes were Athenian imperialism, a fear of growing power, and political rivalries. There were three phases. You had the Archidamean War. That's the Pericles, right? Famously, Pericles retreating behind the walls. Ended with the Peace of Nicaeus, and this was from 431 to 421. So what we'll see is what does that mean? So remember, this was Athens, and then Athens has these walls around it. But Athens was a naval power, but they weren't on the sea. They didn't have actually a port. But they did have Piraeus, which was the port city. So if this is Athens and there's the Acropolis, they had this super long like skirt wall that went all the way from Athens to Piraeus, where the navy, where the ships were, and the port was. And so this is kind of the setting for the tragedy of Pericles and the Archidamean War. Then the second stage was the Sicilian expedition, which was from 415 to 413 BC, which was a catastrophic failure for Athens and heavily mocked by Aristophanes in The Bird. So when we're reading The Birds, he's mocking the Sicilian expedition. And that's interesting. And the Ionian and Decelean War, which was 413 to 404, that was the Spartan alliance with Persia and Athenian internal collapse. So the outcome of all of this was that Athens surrendered in 404, lost its empire, fleet, and walls, and the democracy was briefly overthrown by an oligarchic regime known as the 30 Tyrants. And so Aristophanes, I don't think he was very happy about that. And the Athens was split between democrats and oligarchs. Democrats favored wider participation in governing. Obviously, that's what democracy is. And the oligarchs favored rule by elite, and they were aligned with the Spartans. And the tension surfaced constantly in Aristophanes' plays. So the Knights and Lysistrata. The Knights is like his big, or is one of his big like criticisms of these tyrants. And so this kind of gives us a little more context, right? Like, so we've kind of got the stage set. We've got this amazing theater in Athens, and everyone's there, and then you have this political sort of undercurrent and this political tension, and then Aristophanes, he's mocking it, and he's definitely playing a role as well. So Aristophanes wrote amid this whirlwind, right? And this really gives us a lot of historical context. So early plays like the Acarnanians, which we're not reading, and the Knights attack warmongers and demagogues like Cleon. Later plays like Lysistrata and the Frogs reflect the war weariness, cultural decline, and nostalgia. He criticizes both populism and elite corruption while upholding an ideal of old Athenian virtue. Yeah. And then I said, so that gives us, so yeah, I mean, just thinking about that, I mean, what an incredible, like, you couldn't even write something like this, I feel. You have this incredible empire, this incredible city with giving birth to these great men. I mean, have there been greater men than the men that came out of Athens in this period? What was in the water back then, and then there's all this corruption and this sort of decline and a war that destroys the civilization. And then we're so lucky that Aristophanes' plays exist, because it puts us right in the middle of the politics of that period. So I want us to sort of keep that in mind as we're reading. So my next question was, list and describe all of the real people that Aristophanes wrote about in his plays. Who were they? What did they do? And how did Aristophanes feel about them? So this is good for us, just get an introduction to these people, because obviously the people who are watching the play at the time, in ancient Athens, they would have known who everyone was. So just give you some exposure and kind of try to remember who they are. So Aristophanes frequently mocked real living public figures. We know that. So the major political targets: number one, Cleon, a powerful Athenian demagogue, general, and populist leader who came after Pericles, the famous Pericles. What did he do? He rose to power during the Peloponnesian War by appealing to the common people. He was aggressive, pro war, and anti elite. Aristophanes loathed him, and we'll see that. He portrayed him as corrupt, loud, vulgar, and a leather seller, a nod to his background in the tanning trade, so a trade. Okay, and he's mentioned in the Knights. Cleon is savagely attacked as the villain. Paphlagon, we're not reading. Oh, no, sorry, as the villain, Paphlagon. Okay, so Cleon is Paphlagon in the Knights. So let's remember that, or try to. Okay, Cleon is Paphlagon in the Knights. The Wasps, which we are reading, and the Acarnians, which we're not, they continue jabs at Cleon's populism and legalism. And Cleon reportedly tried to prosecute Aristophanes for slandering the city. So that must have been. It went better for Aristophanes than it did for Socrates. So good on him. Hyperbolus, he was an Athenian politician and successor to Cleon and another demagogue. He supported imperialist policies and was eventually ostracized. Aristophanes also despised him, and he described him as a corrupt and clownish figure. So he's also mentioned in the Knights, the Wasps, the Peace. I don't think we're reading the Peace, are we? We are not. I'll leave this up. The Peace, the Acarnians we're not reading, and the Frogs we are. So he's mentioned in 3 of the plays we're reading. In the Knights, Aristophanes says he's so vile he's not even worthy of satire. And I'm sure that he was not invited to dinner after that. Lamachus, who a real-life Athenian general known for bravery and support of the war effort. What did he do? He fought in many campaigns and represented the military elite. So Aristophanes, he mocked him as a warmonger, but was not entirely unsympathetic. So, I mean, we get the picture. Aristophanes, he was not for war, and we can imagine why. I mean, his civilization, his beloved Athens, was destroyed because of war, and we can relate. We've had our own wars, and seen what I think it's actually. I mean, I don't want to get all. Well, we're just like Athens, we're just like Rome sort of like trope, but I think we can, to some degree, maybe to a lesser extreme, understand where he's coming from. Yeah, so, and he's mentioned in the Acarnians we're not reading, and he's mentioned in the Frogs as a pointless, as a symbolic of pointless war heroism. So that's really fun. So I feel like he didn't get him too hard because he was like a beloved war hero, but he sort of, it doesn't seem like he had a very romantic view of war or warriors. Intellects and artists, so Socrates, the most famous philosopher and teacher of Plato and the literal founder of Western philosophy, essentially. We know what Socrates does. We've heard of him, I'm sure. And we'll be reading Plato's dialogues as well later in the series. He criticized him as as a symbol of useless intellectualism and social decay. So the Clouds, which we're going to read, portrays him as a mad scientist sophist running a thinkery that teaches students how to justify any immoral act. So that's hilarious, honestly. Like, you're a useless intellectual sedentary scholar, Socrates. Like, I can't wait to read that. And I don't believe that. I mean, Socrates was also like a renowned warrior, I'm pretty sure. But anyway. Later critics, notably Plato, suggested the Clouds helped prejudice the public against Socrates before his trial. So, Aristophanes may have had a hand in Socrates' untimely demise, unfortunately for him. And for the world, maybe. Euripides was one of the great Athenian tragedians, one of the 3. There are 3. He's known for writing tragedies, and Aristophanes mocked him for feminizing tragedies and using beggars and prostitutes as heroes and being too clever. Can't do that. He's mentioned in the Frogs, which we're reading, and in the Frogs, there's a date between Hades, in Hades, between Euripides and Aeschylus over who is the better tragedian. Next, which brings us to our next one, Aeschylus, another tragedian, and he's often used to critique modern decadence. So Aristophanes did not like the decadence of the high Athenian Empire, and we said how he's mentioned in Frog. Sophocles, sorry, is the third great tragedian and the author of Oedipus Rex, which we will be reading. Um, and Aristophanes liked Sophocles. So he must have been something special because it seemed like Aristophanes had no problem attacking literally anyone, including the leader and ruler of his own civil society, his own nation. So Sophocles was pretty chill. Cratinus, older comic playwright, he mocked his decline in drunkenness in The Knights and the Wasps. We'll be reading both. He's washed up. Oh man. Miscellaneous, Nicias, Athenian general. He lumped him in with other flawed leaders in the Knights and the Frogs. Demosthenes, a general. He mocked him lightly over drinking and bombast in the Knights. Anytus, he's a politician and later accuser of Socrates. Aristophanes disliked or likely disliked him, and he's not referenced, so I don't know why that's even there. Okay, so that's really cool. So just I think that's really useful to talk about because, especially Cleon, because Cleon's not named. So Cleon is who is Cleon? He is pa, Paphlagon. So when we see Paphlagon in the Knights, that's Cleon, who was a demagogue of Athens after the Peloponnesian War, and Aristophanes hated him. Um, okay, and then finally, what facts, concepts, and ideas would be most beneficial for someone who is about to start reading plays by Aristophanes to understand so they could get the most out of the experience, right? So just kind of an overview. We'll breeze through this. Historical and political context, we just talked about the Peloponnesian War, the Athenian democracy, the Athenian Empire, political factionalism. That's what we were just talking about. The comedy convention. So let's go through this one more time, okay, because this breaks down how the old comedy is structured. The parabasis. The chorus directly addresses the audience on behalf of the playwright to express opinions or break the fourth wall. Okay, so that's when Aristophanes is kind of speaking to us directly. Agon, a formal debate between opposing characters that often settles the comic dilemma. So peace versus war. The chorus, often bizarre. It plays a central interactive role in shaping the action and tone. Komos, a celebratory ending, often sexual, festive, or absurd premises, and topical satire. Themes and philosophical undercurrents. So we're going to be dealing with war and peace in Peace and Lysistrata. Democracy versus demagoguery. That's kind of what the Knights and the Wasps are about. Philosophy and education. The Clouds, where he goes against Socrates. Gender and sexual politics. Lysistrata, which is one we'll be reading. And art and culture. The Frogs, where he talks about the decline of Athenian society. I feel like we're going to be able to learn a lot from these plays because, we deal with a lot of the same problems now. We are kind of in a decaying, decadent, great global empire, which is what Athens was. So it's really interesting. I'm glad we did this. Obviously, language and wordplay, religious and cultural framework. We talked about this. Okay, and that's pretty much it. So that's the story. I mean, that was a lot. I went way over time of what I expected, but basically, that is Aristophanes. If you want to be reading the same version as I am, make sure that you use our Amazon affiliate link, which you can find in the description of the video and also on our blog. Make sure to like and subscribe. Make sure to follow us on all social media and share and spread the word. So now, with that long-winded explanation of Aristophanes, let's get reading. I'm excited, and I'll see you on the other side.